Welcome to the Untamed. This is a space where we explore the lives of those who existed outside the lines, the ones who challenged norms, disrupted expectations, or simply refused to be shaped by the world around them. Some were celebrated, some were misunderstood. Some were forced into the spotlight, whether they wanted it or not. But all of them left something behind. A shift, a question, a mark that still lingers. There are some people who set out to change the world, and then there are people who have the world change around them. Everett Klippert was not an activist in the traditional sense. He didn't organize movements. He didn't seek attention. By most accounts, he was a quiet man, a mechanic, a laborer. Someone who lived a relatively ordinary life. And yet, his name became part of a turning point in Canadian history. To understand what happened, it matters to start with who he was beyond the headlines. Klippert was born in 1926 in Alberta. He worked various jobs throughout his life, including as a mechanic and later a mine worker in the Northwest Territories. He was known as reserved, private, not someone looking to be the center of anything. He was also a gay man at a time when that reality was not just stigmatized, but criminalized. And like many men in that era, his life existed in a careful balance between visibility and survival. In 1965, while being questioned by the police in the Northwest Territories about an unrelated matter, Klippert admitted, openly and without coercion, that he had engaged in consensual relationships with other men. That admission would change his life. At the time, homosexual acts in Canada were illegal. But what followed went further. Rather than simply charging him under existing laws, Klippert was declared a dangerous sexual offender, not because of violence, not because of harm, but because experts testified that he was unlikely to stop being who he was. That designation carried an indefinite sentence, which meant he could be imprisoned for the rest of his life, not for what he had done, but for what he was believed to be. And in that moment, his life stopped belonging solely to him. It became a case, a symbol, a line in a much larger conversation about law, morality, and human rights. The case of Everett Klippert eventually reached the Supreme Court of Canada, and when the court upheld his designation, it sparked national attention. Public reaction grew. Questions were raised. Not just about Klippert himself, but about the laws that made his imprisonment possible. At the time, Pierre Trudeau, then serving as Minister of Justice, famously stated, "There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation." Shortly after, in 1969, Canada decriminalized homosexual acts between consenting adults. Klippert was released the following year. It would be easy to frame this story as a clean narrative. A man suffers injustice and change follows. But that kind of storytelling can flatten something important. Because Klippert didn't choose to be a symbol. He didn't step forward to lead a movement. He lived his life and was pulled into history by systems that refused to let him exist quietly. And even as his case contributed to legal change, he returned afterward to a life that remained largely private. Which raises a more complicated truth. Sometimes the people who shift the world aren't the ones trying to. They're the ones who are simply unable to conform to it. There's something deeply untamed about that. Not rebellion in the loud, visible sense, but in the quiet refusal to become something you're not. Klippert's story isn't just about law or injustice or even progress. It's about identity, about what happens when a system tries to define a person as a problem to be solved, and about the cost of existing outside what is considered acceptable. Some people are remembered because they fought loudly, some because they led movements, and some because their lives exposed something the world could no longer ignore. Everett Klippert was one of those people, not just a case, not a moment in history, but a person who lived, worked, existed, and in doing so became part of something much larger than himself.